All right, everyone, I want to talk to you guys about a topic that really gets little to no attention, and that is the occult in the Catholic Church. There is an experience in my life that really got me to dig deeper, to inquire further into this phenomena, and that is when I was in Italy back in 2019. Now, when I was in Italy back in 2019, I was spending pretty much all of my time with this group of nuns. This group of nuns, they are a part of a monastic order that's headquartered in San Francisco, and they were headed by a woman named Sister Gloria Riva. Now, Sister Gloria Riva, if you ever take a look at her face, I mean, she looks like a witch, right? She looks very creepy. And one night we were in the car. It was like 9:30 p.m. We were stuck in traffic in the middle of the North Italian countryside. So just picture this in your head, right? Italian countryside, nighttime, traffic, and you are in a vehicle with a nun, right? Or really with multiple nuns. But we were with the head nun of this group, of this organization of nuns. And Sister Gloria Riva was talking to us about how she had a very close friend who was a Kabbalist master, a Kabbalist wizard. Now, Kabbalism is Jewish occultism. That's what the Kabbalah is. And she was describing this friend of hers as a very close friend, and she described him as a saint. She told us, I consider this Kabbalist master a saint. Now, for a nun to consider an occultist as a saint is obviously very suspicious and is a huge red flag. So I began to dig deeper into this group of nuns. I began to dig deeper into Sister Gloria Riva, and I found some very weird stuff. For example, she says that God is both, that the Holy Spirit is both feminine and masculine, and she has a friend who is into sculpture making, and this friend of hers makes these weird sculptures that look like ancient fertility idols. I mean, it was very, very creepy. And I found a video that was uploaded by the monastery. And the video showed a picture from the monastery showing a six-pointed star. And it looked kind of like the Star of David. A six-pointed star made of some kind of fabric. And there were candles around the star, and on the center of the star was a photograph of a dead nun. And they were trying to pray for the soul of this dead nun. Now, when I see a six-pointed star with candles in some monastery that's in the middle of nowhere, because this monastery is in a village that has probably like 200 people living in it, so very obscure, very much so in the boonies, which makes it creepier. But when I see, a six-pointed star and there are candles and there's a picture of a dead nun in the middle of it, that's pretty creepy. And it looked occultic. It just looks very creepy. Now, this research, this investigation that I did on this monastic movement really started a deep interest into the occult in the Catholic Church. Because if this was just one group of nuns headed by a nun who is pretty well connected in the Vatican, then that really tells me that there's more going on, right? This is just a part of the tip of the iceberg. This is a canary in the coal mine, if you will. So you have poisonous gas, and the canary is the first one to get affected by the gas, thus giving the sign to the humans to run away. So there's something going on in the Catholic Church that is occultic. And really the whole world saw an indication of this with Pachamama. I mean, you see this idol, and you have some women dressed up with feathers on their heads, and they're burning incense, and they're making a circle, and they're moving in a circle, and there's this idol of Pachamama. I mean, it looks like something out of Apocalypto. And people said, oh, this is fine. Oh, this is great. Nope, no problem here. Nope, there is no problem here. It's like, what do you mean there's no problem here? Obviously, this is idolatry. Pachamama, some earth goddess, some fertility idol, and they're saying, oh, no, it's not paganism. No, not paganism at all. Okay, so what is it then? Oh, it's just reverence for Our Lady of the Amazon. And you really have to be a fool to believe this. I mean, it's just so... there is something so obviously wrong with all of this. And they are people who know that there's something wrong, but then you have people who buy into the propaganda, and they buy into the gaslighting and the smoke screening that the Vatican is very good at doing, very effective at doing, because a lot of people believe that the Vatican has done no wrong. It's okay. Everything is fine. You know, all those pedophile priests, yeah, that's not really a problem anymore. That was more of a problem back in the 70s and the 80s, but now, you know, that problem really isn't there as much, so it's okay. Everything is fine, guys. Yeah, sure. So, recently I began an investigation into the occult in the Catholic Church. And it hasn't been that easy because this topic really isn't talked about a whole lot in the English language, which has gotten me to dig into the information that is in the Italian language. Now, in the Italian language, I found a lot more information, which leads me to believe that occultism in the Catholic world is something that is probably more prevalent in Europe than it is in the United States. Although I could be wrong about that. Maybe there are secret witches' covens somewhere. I found some interesting things. They are priests who are involved in the occult. They are priests who have been involved in the occult, who have passed away. And there is something in the Catholic world called parapsychology. Now, I have to refer to this term because in the Catholic world, they're not saying, oh yeah, we're in the occult, right? You don't have priests walking around saying, oh yeah, I'm an occultist or I'm into the occult. You do have people in the Catholic world, you do have people who are in the hierarchy of the Vatican who say that they are into something called parapsychology. Parapsychology it's basically occultism that is masqueraded with scientific jargon, right? Or words that sound sophisticated enough to deceive people. So, for example, they will contact the dead and some kind of paranormal event will take place, some kind of paranormal activity will occur, and they will record or document that paranormal happening, and they'll say, this is all for research. So, they say that, you know, we're not into the occult, we're not occultists, but we're going to contact the dead. We are going to do something to contact the deceased, the soul of some dead person. And if something happens, something levitates, or some voice is heard through a radio or through a phone, the telephone rings, you pick up the phone and you hear the voice of the deceased, we're going to make a note of this. And we're just going to call it research, and we're going to say we are parapsychologists, right? So there is occultism in the Vatican. There is occultism within Catholic academia in Europe, in the Catholic world, but they don't call it occultism, they call it parapsychology. So there are people who have talked about this, and I want to give you guys a very revealing quote here. This is very interesting, and this really motivated me to inquire deeper into this phenomena. This is a quote from Father Francesco Bamonte, president of the International Association of Exorcists, and he warned about the presence of parapsychology in Catholic academia. And this is what he said, quote, "I would like to point out the very serious and deplorable fact of the presence in the theological faculties of some countries of so-called parapsychology courses. Using the method of experimental sciences, it is proposed to study phenomena out of the ordinary, such as, for example, the so-called telepathy, clairvoyance, extrasensory perceptions, telekinesis, ghost, levitation, out-of-body experiences, spiritism, etc." So this is from the president of the International Association of Exorcists, and he's warning about this. He is saying that basically there is a faction in the Catholic world that is into the occult, but they masquerade their occultism under the term of parapsychology to make it sound scientific. And this is a smokescreen to deceive people. So people won't say, oh, look, there's occultism going on. They'll say, oh, no, they're a parapsychologist. It sounds scientific, so it must be harmless. And this is the strategy that they are utilizing to put a smokescreen in front of people's eyes. But there is definitely occultism that's going on in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Now, in my research into this, I found out about this movement in Italy. It is known as the Movimento della Speranza, the Movement of Hope. This is an occultist Catholic organization in Italy that also goes under the term of parapsychology. This movement goes back to the 1970s, and it begins with a couple, a husband and wife, by the name of Umberto and Agnese Monetta. Their last name was Monetta. So Mr. and Mrs. Monetta had a son by the name of Francesco. Francesco died at a young age of some kind of an illness, I believe. And so Agnese and Umberto Monetta, the Monettas, they wanted to contact their dead son. The husband and the wife both got very interested in the idea of contacting the dead, so they began to deal with a channeler or a medium. And this medium supposedly had the gift of automatic writing. Automatic writing is another activity that is done under the mask of parapsychology. And basically, automatic writing is you contact the dead, and there is a medium who has a pen and paper and begins to write. Whatever she is writing is what the dead person wants you to know. So the dead person is communicating with the living through a writer, through someone who's doing automatic writing. And that person starts writing, and this person supposedly is not writing under their own volition. They are being, whatever they are writing is dictated by the dead person that is being contacted. So they worked with this automatic writer, this medium, this occultist. She began to write, and the parents saw the handwriting, and they saw the signature, and they said that this is the handwriting of our son, and they said that the signature that was written was identical to the signature of their son Francesco. So they were convinced that this stuff was real, and they began to continue on with their contacting the dead, and they began a movement, and other parents began to visit them, and they started having meetings, and all these people started visiting them, parents who had lost loved ones, and they wanted to make contact with their deceased children. And so this movement began to grow in the 1970s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and eventually Agnese Monetta wrote her first book. And this book became somewhat popular. It widened the movement. It swelled the movement. And more and more people got involved. More and more people wanted to meet with the Monettas to make contact with their deceased loved ones. So they had their first conference, and attending the conference was a priest by the name of Father Eugenio Ferrarotti. He himself was an occultist. Ferrarotti was an occultist, and he was mentored by one of Italy's biggest occultists, one of the biggest occultists of Italy's history, and that is Roberto Setti. Roberto Setti was a major occultist. Some even have said that he was the biggest spiritist in Italy's 20th century occult revival. And Roberto Setti began to teach the occult to Father Eugenio Ferrarotti. And Father Eugenio Ferrarotti recounted a meeting that he had with Roberto Setti, in which he said that he saw Roberto Setti actually manifest light, that he had the ability to just manifest a ball of light. And he told Eugenio Ferrarotti to hold the light Now, I'm not sure if this guy, if Ferrarotti was a priest at this time. He could have been in the seminary. But nonetheless, even after becoming a priest, he continued to teach parapsychology. And Ferrarotti recounted that he grabbed the light and he held the light in his hands and he covered the light. And Roberto Setti told him to open up his hands. And when he opened up his hands, he saw a little angel on his hand, standing on his hand. And Ferrarotti swore by this. He said that this actually indeed happened. Now, whether it happened or not is not really relevant. What's relevant is the fact that you have a priest who is preaching the occult. And he's not being condemned by the Vatican. He is not being stopped by the Vatican. And Eugenio Ferrarotti became a leading figure for the Movimento della Speranza, for the movement of hope, this occultist Catholic movement in Italy. Now, there was another couple that would become big players in the movement of hope. This was Edda Catani and Minore, her husband. Minore sounds a lot like menorah. Anyway, so they enrolled themselves into this conference. I think this was in 1992. And while they were there was a speaker in the conference that really grabbed their attention. And this speaker was a priest by the name of Father Magni, Pasquale Magni. And he was speaking and he was grabbing the attention of this couple, Edda Catani and Minore. And this priest was talking about how in every human being there is this light, and after the body dies, this light goes to the far beyond. And this light, or he talked about, and it's kind of hard for me to explain because there was so much pseudoscience in it, a lot of pseudoscientific terms. It sounds a lot like mumbo jumbo. But he talked about how in every human being there are waves and light. And after death, this structure of waves and light goes to the far beyond, goes to the afterlife. And this structure is filled with thought. So the thought of the person, or I guess you could say the mind of the person, lives in eternity, and thus we can communicate with this person's eternal thought. Something like that. So this speech, this lecture really, really impressed the Catanis. And Catani, Edda Catani and her husband, they were in a state of mourning because their son Andrea had died. And this was part of the reason why they attended this conference. They wanted to confirm a paranormal experience that they had that they believed was with their son Andrea. So the story went that that Minore Catani went to mass, and he was in line to receive communion. And while he was in line, he had a little tape recorder in his pocket, and the tape recorder was on. And he wanted to offer up a mass for his deceased son, but he was hoping that his son would communicate with him in the process of this. So he reaches the priest, he gets to the priest gives him the communion, and the recorder, the tape recorder is on. It's on record in his pocket. So he receives communion, and then later on he listens to the tape, and he hears this voice coming out of the tape. So when the priest in the tape recording says something like, the body of Christ, he hears this voice saying, I have communicated with you. And he claimed that it sounded like the voice of his son. So when he and his wife went to this conference for the Movement of Hope, and they heard Father Agni talking about light and waves and talking to the dead, they were very excited about this, and they said, this is the guy that we're going to talk to. So after the conference, they met up with Father Agni in his hotel, and they explained to him this story about the tape recorder, and Father Agni basically told them exactly what they wanted to hear, and that was, oh yes, this is your son, and you had a paranormal experience with him. And ever since then, they were hooked onto this movement of Catholic occultism, of parapsychology, and Etta Katani attended every single conference since that experience, since that meeting. And eventually she became the leader of the Movimento della Speranza, of the Movement of Hope. And she is still the leader of this movement to this day. Now, I would like to read for you guys a quote from Father Gino Concetti, who was one of the Vatican's most competent theologians. And he said this in an interview. Quote, according to the modern catechism, God allows our deceased loved ones who live in an ultra-terrestrial dimension to send messages to guide us in certain moments in our life. The Church has decided to no longer prohibit dialogue with the dead, provided that these contacts are motivated by serious religious and scientific purposes. So, you ever wonder how paganism began? The Book of Wisdom, which is in the original Bible, right? It's not in the Protestant Bible, but it's in the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles. The Book of Wisdom tells us the origin of paganism and how it began. And it tells us that it began when a man lost his son, and he was so saddened by this that he wanted to contact the soul of his dead son. And so he did. And he made a little idol of his son, and people noticed this and they began to get curious with this stuff. And they started to participate in contacting the dead, contacting the souls of their dead loved ones. And the movement spread, and it continued to spread. And then kings took a note of this. Kings began to notice all of this, and they said, well, I want people to worship me when I die. So they started making idols for the kings, and they started worshiping dead kings. And then they also worshipped living kings, and the kings really liked that because they wanted people to worship them. And that was paganism. So it's taking us to the beginning point of the roots of paganism. And this is why this is so dangerous. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys have heard some theology. God bless.